How do you address minimum wage? Well, we're getting all the fun ones right out of the way to begin with. So minimum wage. Let's look at the history of minimum wage in this country, at least. When black people were being freed from slavery, and when an increasing number of immigrants were coming into the country to do labor, there were a lot of people that were not very happy about people who were not white or were not their idea of white at the time, that were able to get work because they were willing to work for less than they were. And so they actually created laws that said, okay, here is the white standard of what someone should be paid. And because we believe that most employers, if they have to pay this amount, they're going to go with a white person than with someone else. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, that's what ended up happening. And it actually shut out people of color and migrants from being able to do work. Fast forward ahead to what we have now. Minimum wage is a imposition on a market telling people what labor is worth instead of allowing the laborer and the employer to make that decision between them, or even to allow a labor union and an employer to make that decision collectively between them. It's the government arbitrarily saying, okay, all labor is worth at least this much. And here's the problem with that. The big companies can afford it. In fact, you'll notice Amazon and Walmart have actually started pushing for minimum wage increases. Do you know why? Not because of the goodness of their heart. It's because they know it'll shut out their smaller competitors. They can afford it. It'll hurt their bottom line, but they can afford it. Their competitors probably can't afford it. They'll have to downsize. They'll have to have fewer employees. They may have to go out of business. They may have to do something else because they can't afford the minimum labor increases. Here's the problem here, because here's what the real issue is. Because when you talk to someone who says, I want a higher minimum wage, they're not saying, I want the government to force employers to charge an arbitrary amount. What they're saying is, I need more money, or I believe other people who are working need more money. And they do, because the cost of living continues to skyrocket. Well, here's why the cost of living continues to skyrocket. Because of regulatory burdens that government puts in place that makes everything, but especially things like housing and healthcare and education more expensive, but really makes everything at least a little more expensive. And also because the Federal Reserve is printing out endless trillions of dollars to loan to the government that they can spend on all the things like wars and putting people in cages and camps on the border and all the stuff that they know we'd never agree to tax increases for. So instead what they do is they just print out money, lend it to themselves, and stick us with the bill with interest for the next 30 or 40 years, which is a way more insidious way of stealing from us, right? Because they're not just taxing us up front, they're without really our consent or approval or even our input, they're just going ahead and doing it, paying for it from their own money that they've printed out, and then stuck you with the bill with interest. And because they're printing out endless streams of money without adding any corresponding value to that extra money, and they're inflating the monetary supply without inflating the value, your money is worth less. Those same Federal Reserve notes that you have in your wallet or in your bank account or stuffed under your bed or wherever you have your money is worth less and less and less every single day. It's been happening every day since 1913, and that's not the way it used to be. The cost of living used to go up and down regularly with various economic conditions and supply and demand. Now it just steadily goes up. Even if the economy tanks, the cost of living goes up. The economy does well, the cost of living goes up. And the reason is because there's this endless printing out of Federal Reserve notes, something that would never happen in a free market system of banking and currency. So those are the real problems. That's how you make it so that your money is actually worth something. That's how you make it where employers aren't having to go out of business because they can't afford the regulatory burdens and the wage increases. That's how you deal with that problem.